Hi everybody, and welcome to the first in our how-to series. I'm delighted to welcome Fiona Bell from CropDrop, who is going to be speaking to us today about how to build partnerships to benefit your local community. Hello, Fiona. How are you?
Hello, Isabel. I'm well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for this lunchtime chat. It's a first for me being live streamed on YouTube and Facebook, so I'm looking forward to sharing our experiences with CropDrop and that we had in 2020, and hope they'll help some other projects and other organisations who might want to get started on something and build some partnerships.
Great. So I think you've got some slides for us to start with.
Yes. I'm just going to pull those across, and hopefully those all look like they are working okay. So here we are. This is my little first slide, but if I move on from here, before you work on your partnerships, I sort of thought about this, thought we ought to think about the how. So before you think about the how, think about where your potential partnerships are. I've got a bit of a systems background, so I created this little spider cloud to show some categories of partnerships that are available in local communities. So who are the people you know in your community that are interested in your project, the individuals? Which groups do they know about? And where are the people who are affected by your operation, who can share information about your project with your community? All those kind of questions. And so you'll see on my little spider map here a few of the people that I came up with, or the organisations that I thought might be involved with people's projects. So if we move on, I've got this now populated for my little project that I'm going to talk about, CropDrop. It's in July, from various previous volunteering interests, we knew about the affordable food projects down here in the bottom area here, in that square and rectangle, established ones and new ones. They'd been going before and during lockdown. Then we heard about an abundance of courgettes at allotments around Bath that were waiting to be shared. And from previous volunteering, we knew there'd be volunteer drivers around who might be happy to help connect the two people. So these initial partnerships we knew we needed for our idea are shown in those boxes. So linking up the allotment associations with the affordable food projects via a team of volunteer drivers. So everybody here was interested in showing them. There's some other people around, but at the time they weren't the major partnerships. So I'm going to talk a bit about, just as an example, what go on from there. Thinking about building on your foundations. So the first thing I'd say you really need to do is make sure you get a personal introduction if you can. In our allotment links, there was a lady, Lynn, who was a member of both Transition Bath and the Bath Allotment Association, and she'd told us about the courgette glut, and she made our first CropDrop happen. So I phoned my contact at Bath Area Play Project. She made the connection and arrangements, and Lynn actually drove the courgettes from the allotment up to the project. But when word spread of the success in the Allotment Association, we could then be introduced by name into another allotment group at a different site. Then as we started to look at that and think, well, we need to connect with those people, and we had a recommendation, when we started saying, well, where are all the other allotments in our local authority area, we found that there were way more groups than we realised. There were 24 in Bath. There's probably, I think we're nearly up to 50 or so in the rest of Bath NE Somerset. Some are on land owned by local authorities, some are on land owned by town councils, parish councils, and some are privately owned. So when you say, oh, we want a personal introduction, obviously we haven't got personal introductions to those, but it really helped if we could get a name. So we'd then approach the town council or the parish council and say, could you connect us with, how would you suggest we contact these growers, because we want to share this idea. So it really helped to have a name. Sending a blanket email out or a poster we found didn't work so well. So we had most success, I'd say, if we could personalize our emails by saying something about the site we were trying to contact and how we'd been introduced. Making a phone call if you could, and even if you could just visit the actual site and actually see someone person to person, it would really help give you a good foundational start to that relationship. and that seems to have sort of carried on all the way through. The other thing that we did with our foundational links was sort of learn from them and think about things like listening to our partners' stories. So when we listened to the allotmenteers and met up with them, we'd say, look, how have you come to be an allotmenteer? What are you doing here? And what do you think about this idea of sharing it with another project? And surprise, surprise, we weren't the first people to have arrived. People have shared produce before. So people were a bit skeptical that we were just new on the block, new kids, or what was it, why were we any different? Why were we going to be sustainable? So we listened to their stories and we listened to the challenges they thought about. So for example, they were worried that they harvested at the weekend, projects only wanted the food on a weekday. So we looked at why we'd ask them what are the challenges. So they were worried about the weather, and then they were worried about foraging animals at some places. So we were anticipating them, thinking, oh, well, how can we fix that? So we procured some boxes, which is what is in that picture there, some boxes that they could put on their allotment that would have a cover on them, so that they were shaded and then they had some protection. But it was about listening to what their objections were and then trying to fix them without saying it was their job to fix them, to try and help them, and then saying, well, we're here, we're coming back next week, and then really turning up and being there next week. So they started to build a sort of trust with them, that we weren't just a flash in the pan doing it for a quick win, I guess. So that was kind of part of the first mission, to build on the foundation and people you know. And I had a couple of other tips to just highlight before we perhaps talk about questions and things, was this whole idea of walking in your partner's shoes. If you want to build a partnership with someone, really put why should they engage with you and this new group? So there's an example of this when we wanted some support from the media, such as the local radio stations. So I actually went and listened to a few of the programmes that we wanted to be sort of featured on, and listened to the tone of the presenters and what they were trying to promote. And at the time, BBC Radio Somerset and Radio Bristol were promoting Make a Difference, how people made a difference in their communities. So when we then tweeted about it or put it in on our social media, we used the language of their campaign and what they were trying to do, not only with the hashtags, but actually tailored our story to match what the presenter was actually being paid to do, which was to show how things were making a difference. And a bit like today, you want to talk about building partnerships. So I'm trying to skew my, I'm framing my story about CropDrop in terms of partnerships, not just in terms of what we did. But the other key tip, which has been quite amusing for people we have spoken to, is about nourishing your inner slime mould. Now, I don't know if many of the listeners will know much about slime mould as an organism, and they might be horrified at the thought of the word slime, but actually slime mould behaves in quite an interesting way. It grows where it finds nourishment. We've even found a little model of it to have the it grows and spreads where it finds nourishment. They've even trained slime mould to go through a maze by finding its nourishment. And the message for us in our partnerships is that they needed to be nourishing. They needed to be nourishing both for us and our partners. And if you're not feeling, some of the partnerships we tried to build just didn't seem to work. There were some areas of Bath we were trying to connect with, and the allotment people didn't really want to talk to us. There were people in the Summer Valley saying, no, come back next year. You can spend a lot of time trying to persuade people, but when there are other people around the corner who say, yeah, we'll give a go at this, and it might not be exactly what you plan to do, but actually it feels good. It feels good for them, it feels good for you. So we'd give it a go. And then we'd find that the people who were reluctant before might then want to get involved because they heard of the success that we'd had sort of nourishing everybody else, which is it sounds a bit of it's not quite as structured as an approach as I'm used to, but it's actually been really beneficial in this set of circumstances, I guess. So if you've built on your foundations, which was your foundational partnerships, I think you then can start to get the confidence that you can extend your partnerships. And this picture is really teams up sort of two of the partnerships that we didn't even know or anticipate would even have been on that little cloud diagram I showed at the start. So in October, a local farm had been running a pumpkin project, as a lot of farms do, and they'd planted up a whole field of 32 pumpkins. And 32 varieties, sorry, of pumpkins and squashes, and they had to close early because the field got flooded. And I kept driving past the field and ended up going and talking to the farm shop, going into the farm shop on the day the farmer happened to be there, and happened to talk to him and said, well, could we save any of those pumpkins, or could we look at them? We ended up rescuing 600 pumpkins and squashes from this flooded field, because they were like melons, really interesting varieties that cook up just like butternut squash. And because of that, that's led on to us looking at gleaning and teaming up with the gleaning experts in Bristol, and started to talk to them about how we could perhaps share produce with the network we've now built up. I don't have to become a gleaning expert, but I'm partnering now with a person who is interested in gleaning. And we shared with a community cafe, which hadn't been on our radar before. So the Swallow Community Cafe down in Madstock does wonderful things. And because we had so many squashes and pumpkins, we shared these squashes with them, and they made it all into soup. And then that led to more news and more interest. And they're now one of our partners. So it is surprising how I think extending your partnership can take you into places you haven't anticipated. But actually work really well in the whole when you step back and look after 7-8 months of operations and where that's taken us. So I kind of what did I have just then? I was going to show you. I come back to really, where are your partnerships, and being aware of where they are. Work on the ones that you give you nourishment and are your core at what you're doing, and then look at extending them. And you'd be surprised at what sorts of things you can achieve.
Absolutely, that was really brilliant, and I particularly like the slime mold. I think we should definitely encourage that throughout all of our lives, I suppose. Nourish the relationship, or work with the relationships that are nourished. Definitely. So thank you very much for the presentation, and now we are going to move on to some questions. So I've got a few things here. If someone was starting out on a project like yours, what would you say is a very quick way to build a relationship, start building a network if you haven't really got any kind of existing contacts? So I know you obviously mentioned that somebody within your group had that like great kind of job of knowing things about allotments and knowing about the food organizations already. But if you're kind of starting from scratch and you don't have those relationships in existence already, what is the best way to kind of start, really?
I think I'd say there's definitely one of the best quotes I heard recently. We were on a Small Charities Commission course about forming a not-for-profit organisation, and that was a free course actually. It's like the Small Charities Coalition are definitely a really good bunch of people. And she said, no, whatever idea you've had, no matter how much you think you're the only person with this unique idea, there is probably somebody else in the UK or in the world, but probably in the world, but who has also thought something very similar, at least. So actually, there is a lot of ways of finding it. You really helped by finding somebody else who feels they want to do something similar, and mostly people I find are happy to share their ideas to help you magpie what they've been doing and do it in your area. So it's about find a friend, test out your ideas on your family and any of your contacts anyway, and be really clear about why you're doing it. I mean, I think you hear about the 5 W's and how. I used to always sort of approach problems, where, when, why, who, what, and how. But that why one, if you're really clear on why you're doing what you're doing, and are very clear, you can then share that with other people. Then go look on the Charities Commission website, because now when you register as a charity, you have to say what area you're working on. Look on use Google, use Carbon Copy, and other such organisations that are pooling together, and find someone else that's doing it. Because we've already found really lovely links, because we're looking at extending work with schools, linking through Carbon Copy. We've ended up connecting with a school in Bridport that have done some amazing things that I wouldn't have found without going online. So that's produced a really positive start to ideas about doing edible gardens.
Yeah, brilliant. I think we've talked a little bit about your top priorities in terms of the first organisations to engage. But what have you found is the best way to get in touch with people? I know you mentioned that obviously picking up the phone is good, but I mean, do you think that people still respond to email? I mean, I know that at the moment, obviously, it's very difficult to go visit people in person. Sometimes it's difficult to find people's contact details, especially if they're not working in an office at the moment. So, you know, how can you kind of make the ways that we can currently communicate work?
Yeah, I think, I mean, emailing, but certainly with a name, definitely dear sir and dear madam doesn't cut the mustard really. Well, it means that it gives the opportunity for someone to think, well, someone else might deal with this. Or if it's some sort of a blanket email, someone else will pick this up. But if you've personalised it and got the name of the person, and you write anything about, if you know about their organisation, if you look at, if it's at an organisational level, if you can find what their aims are as an organisation by looking at their strategic plan or their mission aims and objectives online, if you use the language of they're using to say what they're about, and your opening paragraph says why you're contacting them and how it matches with what you're trying to, what you're trying to do, it's going to help them achieve their objectives, then that you've got your best chance of attracting their interest and standing out from whatever other work they've got to do that day. But people will respond, and especially in public bodies, town councils, local authorities, parish councils are there, to respond, and definitely, their part of their role is responding to the public. So you're in a position to get some response, I guess, and in specialist organisations, you're okay. I guess it's just in companies. I guess you can get lost in a company structure, and in a local authority, because there's so many different departments, that can be difficult. But I think you can. Mostly, I haven't had people not reply to an email, I'd say. And I certainly think when I introduce somebody, or I am introduced by an email as a new connection, if somebody else can say, I've met this person and here they are, and this is why I think it might be nice for you to talk to them, that seems to be quite an effective way of people picking that up, because using some kind of personal contact one way or another helps. But obviously it's not always there. That isn't always available to you.
No, in some ways I guess it's a bit like applying for a job. It's I get that personal recommendation is good, and finding out loads about the company is good, and it's all those sorts
I'd say just the same skills, I think, and it really helps because and it helps for your grant applications just as a general learning skill. So even though you think, well, that thing you were taught at how to write a CV, actually it's really good skill whatever you're trying to get someone's attention, to look at your give them a reason for why it's worth reading your words.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a question from the audience. It's around how to build partnerships during a pandemic. Obviously, your whole operation has happened during a pandemic. So has that affected what you've been doing at all?
I think it's affected. It has the potential to have slowed down, but the imperative with us is that we had all this fresh produce, that if we didn't do something with it, it was going to end up on the compost heap, which is okay for the soil, but we felt we could do some better stuff with it. So there was an imperative. There is, within the pandemic, if you're volunteering in the food provision sector for people with experiencing food insecurity, then you are classed as an essential worker. So the food projects are operating, the food pantries, the food banks are operating, their volunteers are going in, obviously working under social distancing. All our food clubs are at the allotments. Obviously, in our case, it's gone a bit seasonal, but we are in contact with some market gardens, and we have been able to collect and transport with our drivers safely across 2 projects. All the drivers have to be wearing masks. They all follow social distancing guidelines. I think it probably hasn't slowed it down too badly, and I'm not sure. But we would have had to do. So there's risk assessment in my community fridge. A different hat I have on in the community fridge. We've had to pause because we relied on volunteers to help in the location where our fridge was. And we were, in our risk assessment, we decided we didn't want to put the volunteers we didn't have enough volunteers who wouldn't be at risk for us to carry on the operation, so it's paused. So yes, there are operations that have.
Yeah. And do you think, because obviously being sort of on the essential end of things, you've probably been able to get responses perhaps from organisations that, depending on what kind of partnership you were trying to build, might have been slowed down a little by the pandemic, but I suppose you haven't experienced that quite as much as some other sectors might have with the nature of what you're doing. Yeah.
But people have been very creative in finding alternative ways. I'm quite involved with a number of other charities who've looked at, and certainly by now, a lot of the functions that you thought, oh, I can't do this immediately, they've worked out ways of doing some things, and even doing things, new ways of doing things online. And, you know, people are more accessible in some ways, you know, and we have to watch that we don't get Zoom burnout and stuff, but
yeah.
You know, there are ways of doing things. And I was a games maker years back, so in London 2012, so we always found a way to do things. So I always believe you can find a way to do things one way or another.
Yeah. Another question, if you were starting CropDrop again, would you do anything differently, or what would you do differently?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I would. It's been one of the first projects I would say that no, I wouldn't do it any differently. We really did just follow where things all aligned, and we just went for it. It was partly happenstance. It was, you know, a really great summer. COVID had an impact that people had more time at home and worked on their sorry, my battery's running out. Okay. Sorry. COVID had a bit of an impact that people had more time to spend on their allotments, so there were a lot of things came together. But actually, the team of people that we built all had very similar common values. I'd say definitely it's really good. It's really good to listen to people's stories about their motivation and why they're involved with things. And our first team meeting of the 6 of us who were involved didn't happen until the end of September, when we met first face to face. We'd had Zoom meetings, but we hadn't actually met each other until September as a whole group. And we spent the time listening to each other's stories, and that made that sort of cements your motivations and your partnership, really, because you understand where people are coming from and why they're doing it, and then you trust them even more, and then you're prepared to risk things and try more adventurous things, I think, because you have listened and shared stories. So yes, no, I don't think I would do it differently, which is unusual.
No, but that's great. And I suppose it comes from having worked on other projects before, where presumably you have learned things, and you know, you get to a point where you've learned enough, I suppose, and then the project happens. So yeah. So just a couple of final things. What is the biggest challenge, do you think, at the moment for new organisations that are trying to make their mark, and particularly with regards to organisations that are setting up with the aim of trying to improve things with climate change and the environment? And it seems like at the moment, you know, obviously that's not a lot of people's focus. So how do you kind of
I think it's really difficult, because we were doing so well in a lot of cases. It's things like the plastic bags, you know, we were doing really well with plastic, then suddenly we're just putting everything in plastic bags. So I think the biggest challenge probably is two things: persuading people that you are sustainable and you are around for the long term, that you're not just doing this because you couldn't think of anything else to do, or, you know, that's a cynical kind of approach. But I think persuading people that you are there, and it helps if you do invest in your branding and your message and being really clear on why you're doing things, and having that message. I think pragmatically, there's kind of few difficulties at the moment for new charities, because we were lucky enough we didn't need some funds at the start, and now we're looking to become a properly constituted organisation. the the banks are currently, many of the banks that offer charity bank accounts have paused their banking new accounts, and becoming a registered charity in some form or a not-for-profit is you have to invest quite a lot of time. And you think, well, I'm not achieving anything, but I'm just working through this dry document to get my constitution. So administratively, don't underestimate how much time it takes to actually make yourself into a properly constituted not-for-profit organisation. But there are people out there who will help, who've been through on that journey, I think. And so the hope part is that go through things like the Small Charities Coalition, or your local authority organisation who know of other small organisations or charities that have started up. There are, community foundations who are grant awarding bodies, but they know of other charities that have started up, or they know of other charities. So it's worth contacting them, not because you're trying to get money, but to hear their advice about their experience with charitable ventures. I think there are people out there who will help, but it isn't. It shouldn't be entered into lightly, I think. I mean, you can do things as a community organisation without any money quite easily. Well, as long as you pay attention to safety, I think, people's safety and stuff. But once you get into serious doing things regularly, you need to do things properly and have insurance. And in our case, thinking about allergies, thinking about food handling, thinking about people's time, and obviously under COVID, how they're operating with social distancing and keeping themselves safe.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually had one more question. It's around, is there anything you might do to develop your partnership with the council? And I think that's probably referring to Baines Council as a whole.
Well, we're working a lot with, and we work with them quite a lot, because the original idea came from the Baines, the food poverty officer, who met with the lady Lynn from Transition Bath. So we've been very lucky, because we've been part of the Bath NE Somerset Food Poverty Steering Group and the Affordable Food Network since they started. I think they've been really they've been very supportive of what we've been doing, and so I think in terms of doing more with them, we are ready to do more with them when we're asked, and they, we respond as well as we can. We're helping with a food finder. My colleague Jo has done a lot of work with a food finder application on the website to help people find food. Where are the outlets for food across the local authority area, and we're looking at ways to make that more effective. And if we can end up working with the farmers and in terms of gleaning with this Glean Guy, I think working more with the West of England group, or the people in Bristol we've met, they've got some amazing ideas in Bristol. The stuff that's been going on in Bristol in terms of food, they're going for the Gold Award for Sustainable Cities, and working with them on the food side of things, it can only benefit everybody, I think. Certainly my experience has been with working, like when we did the pumpkins and everything, we helped work with the Bristol contacts I'd made.
Yeah, it feels basically like as soon as you start getting a few key partners under your belt, it sort of snowballs a little bit, and you start to build this really wide network. You've already kind of touched so many different organizations, and you've only been around for 6 or 7 months, so it's very impressive.
And it's delightful, because you meet people who have connections with the organizations that you are trying to connect with, that you suddenly find, oh well, they've actually been involved with them already, or they used to work for them, or they have and you think, oh well, they share what they share between them. One person recommends somebody else, and then you meet these lovely characters who are so nourishing and really helpful, make you feel really pleased about what you're doing, and that you are making a difference, to use Radio Bristol's campaign.
So I mean, I think we've covered a lot. I think my only final question would be kind of more of a kind of inspiring one, is like, what is the one thing that you would encourage everybody to do to make more of a difference in their local community?
Well, I definitely follow and nourish or in a slime mold. I think that has been my big lesson for this year, and I've become aware of a much bigger picture. I had 8 years working, we've had 8 years or so working with the Food Surplus Network, and I hadn't really got into the bigger picture. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I'm quite old now. I'm only over 60, and I still don't know what I don't know, and there's lots to know out there, and I think if you follow and nourish your inner slime mold, you learn all sorts of lovely things, and on the way you not only nourish yourself, you nourish your community as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to everyone who's watching, and we'll be sharing this on our website and also on our social media as well. And thank you very much to Fiona. And if you want to find out more about CropDrop, Fiona, I'll let you do the URL because I can't remember the.
Oh yeah, so well, we're at cropdrop.org.uk is our website, and so you can get us at hello@cropdrop.org.uk. And our social media handle is CropDrop Baines, because there's another outfit that have just the crop. They got the CropDrop bit first, but we're on CropDrop Baines for Bath and NE Somerset.
Lovely. Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Cheers then. Bye bye.